define this for us and describe its relevance.
Attunement is understanding someone else's perspective, seeing the world from their point of view. That is urgent because the landscape of sales has changed. It used to be that buyers had limited information, not many choices, and no way to talk back. That's a world of buyer beware. But now, buyers have lots of information. Sellers no longer have an information advantage. Buyers have lots of choices and lots of ways to talk back. That's a world of seller beware. And always be closing doesn't work in a landscape where buyers have a lot of power and as much information as sellers. And so attunement is absolutely essential to find common ground with someone. So what can I do to see the world from your point of view? What can I do to understand your interests? What can I do to understand where you're coming from? And this capacity to take another's perspective, very much rooted in the social science, is an essential quality in the new world of sales, and there's some ways that we can do it a little bit better.
So, all right, so let's move on to the second one of the ABCs, which is buoyancy. So talk to us about that one.
Sure. I got this idea from one of the people who I profiled in the book. It's a really wonderful man named Norman Hall, who is a Fuller brush man. He's been selling Fuller brushes door to door in the business district of San Francisco for 40 years. And he said something that really stuck with me that I think really will resonate with anybody who has been in sales, and it is this. He said, the hardest part about being in sales is that every day you face, and this is his lovely phrase, an ocean of rejection. An ocean of rejection. And buoyancy is how do you stay afloat on that ocean of rejection? And the social science gives us some clues. What to do before, during, and after an encounter. Before an encounter, it turns out that questioning your abilities, what's called interrogative self-talk, is sometimes often more valuable than positive affirmative self-talk. So saying to yourself, not you can do this, but can you do this? Because then you have to answer the question and you begin strategizing. During encounters, it turns out there are returns to a positive affect and positivity in a way that really surprised me. And then after an encounter, there's some great research out of the University of Pennsylvania showing that one of the best predictors of success in selling anything is how people explain failure. That is what these social psychologists call their explanatory style. And there's a certain way to explain failure that we can learn to leave us more buoyant for the next encounter.
Okay, I like this framework, so I just want you to fill it out a little bit more. So let's just go through before, during, and after again. So besides the question, can I do this? What are a couple other questions? And then explain this positivity ratios, and then the post-game review and how to do that right.
Yeah, no, this is great stuff. I think it's absolutely fascinating. So let's talk about before an encounter. What we're generally counseled to do is to affirm ourselves, to be very positive and declarative. So I say to myself, let's say I'm going in to pitch an idea for a new book. And before that important encounter, I should say to myself, Dan, you got this. You're all over it. You can do this. And that's better than doing nothing. I just want to be clear about that. It's better than going in completely blank-headed and neutral. There's no doubt about that. But it turns out, thanks to some interesting research by scholars at the University of Illinois and Mississippi State, that asking yourself, can you do this, is often more effective. And the reason is that questions, by their very nature, elicit an active response. You have to answer it even implicitly. So if I say to myself, can you do this? I have to answer the question, and I'll say, yeah, I can do this. I've pitched ideas for books before. Yeah, I can do this. This idea is really awesome, and there are 3 key points I got to make sure that I hit. And so what you do there with this interrogative self-talk, with the can you do this self-talk, is that you begin rehearsing, you begin strategizing, and that ends up being more effective than simply the affirmation.
Okay, now let's go through the during. This, you call it positivity ratios.
Yeah, this is a term from Barbara Fredrickson at the University of North Carolina, and what she had found, it's really quite remarkable. This really surprised me, as I said before, that people tend to flourish and be more effective when their ratio of positive emotions, gratitude, curiosity, awe, those kinds of positive emotions, the things that really give our life meaning, exceed negative emotions, things like anger, resentment, envy, by a ratio of 3 to 1. There's kind of a tipping point. So if you have 2 to 1 ratio of positive to negative emotions, you're not going to be that much better off than someone who has an even set of negative and positive emotions. But she found when you get past that 3 to 1 ratio, people end up flourishing and being more effective. Now there's a ceiling on this. Your positivity ratio, if it goes above 11 to 1, 11, it's a high ceiling, man. 11 positive emotions for every negative emotions. then it ends up being counterproductive because it shows that you're basically living in La La Land.
Okay, that's good. And then lastly, how do we do some post-game review?
Yeah, this is really helpful. This has been really helpful to me because as a writer and as someone out there selling books, pushing ideas, I mean, I get rejected all the time. And this is very helpful to me. And so Martin Seligman at the University of Pennsylvania studied life insurance salesmen, mostly men in Pennsylvania, several years ago. And he found that the ones who succeeded over the long haul explained failure in a certain way. Seligman calls it the 3 Ps: personal, pervasive, and permanent. And so they look for ways to explain things as not personal, as external rather than personal. So I went on a sales call, it didn't work, they didn't buy. Is that because I messed up? Well, no, maybe it's because they are not interested in buying right now. Maybe it's because this company I'm selling to is running out of business. Maybe it's because their brother-in-law is in this same business that I am and they're going to be forced to go with their brother-in-law. So maybe it's not entirely personal. Pervasive. A lot of times, since we hate failure so much, since we hate rejection so much, since it feels so toxic, we tend to turn it into a catastrophe, and we say things like, this always happens. But it's important to take a step back, widen our focus, and say, well, does this really always happen? What about that sales call on Tuesday where you actually got the sale? So looking for ways to explain things as occasional rather than pervasive. And then the final P is permanent. A lot of times, again, we tend to think of things as catastrophes. It's really extraordinary, but not surprising, how much we hate rejection. It feels terrible, even if you get it all the time. And so what's important in putting that rejection in context is not to turn it into a catastrophe and say, this is going to ruin everything. It's going to have a permanent effect. Instead, say, you know what? This is just temporary. So the people who really flourish are able to explain rejection in ways that make it more external than personal, more occasional than pervasive, and more temporary than permanent. And what I like about this, Darren, is that it's a kind of tool that all of us can use. It's very easy to apply, doesn't cost you a dime, and I think people will get results very quickly from it.
I like it. So that was Buoyancy, and I underlined in the book, the description, the quality that combines grittiness of spirit and sunniness of outlook. So that brings us to the letter C for clarity, which definition-wise is pretty self-explanatory, or let's say clear, but let's explain it in reference to our discussion. Take us through the C.
Sure. Clarity is, we used to be in a world where being able to access information conferred some kind of competitive advantage. That's not our world anymore. Think about real estate. It used to be that real estate agents had an advantage in that they had the password to the database. Well, if that's your only advantage, your only benefit as a real estate agent, you're not going to do very well today. So the premium has shifted from accessing information to curating information. There's so much information out there that the real skill is, how do you distill that information? How do you make sense of that information? How do you apply your expertise to say to people who are confused, this is what's important, this is what the rest of it is just noise. So that's one dimension of clarity. The other thing, which I also happen to find really interesting, is a shift slightly away from problem solving as a skill. A lot of times in salespeople would say, well, I'm a problem solver. And that's cool. That's cool. But today, if your customer or your prospect knows precisely what its problem is, they can probably find the solution without you. They don't need you that much. Where are you more useful? You're more useful when they don't know what their problem is, or they're wrong about their problem. And so the premium has shifted from the skill of problem solving to the skill of problem finding. Can you identify problems your customer or prospect doesn't realize that it has? Can you surface hidden problems? Can you look down the road and say, hey, you're not confronting this right now, but here's a problem that you're going to face in a few months or a few years. So that's what clarity is, moving from accessing information to curating it, and moving from solving existing problems to identifying new problems.
I really like this, the idea of used to be access to information, and now there's so much information that the power of your message, whether it be a marketing message or a sales message, is clarity of information. And that actually would be far more powerful than just the deluge of more information on the minds of your receivers. So that's great. I love that. All right. Well, as we do